The Air Marshal smirked when an elderly black man quietly claimed he was a legendary Vietnam War hero. But before anyone could laugh louder, the cabin door opened and 3 Pentagon officials stepped in. William Montgomery had only been on this cross-country flight for an hour, his weathered hands resting carefully on the armrests of seat 14C. Back in Chicago, people knew who he was, especially because of his decorated military past. But here, among strangers at 30,000 feet, he was just another elderly black man in economy class, the one with salt and pepper hair, circular reading glasses, and today, a vintage olive green jacket with military patches. The flight attendants had already served drinks when Air Marshal Davis began his routine security briefing. Standing at the front of the cabin, his crisp uniform commanded attention as he explained emergency procedures with practiced efficiency. Then, unexpectedly, he mentioned his own military background. As a former military officer myself, he said, scanning the cabin with cool authority, I can assure you that your safety is my absolute priority. As Davis finished his speech, he asked if anyone had questions. William raised his hand. Sir, I served in Vietnam. Delta Force, Special Operations. Will you be conducting any additional security sweeps during this 5-hour flight? Davis paused, his expression shifting subtly. Delta Force? He repeated, a hint of disbelief in his voice. That's quite a claim. William nodded calmly. Yes, sir. 30 years of service. Led the Ton Hoa Bridge operation in '72. Something changed in Davis's demeanor, his professional mask slipping to reveal something harder, more skeptical. That's interesting, he said, eyebrows rising. I've studied military history extensively. Never heard of a black commander at Ton Hoa. William remained composed. Not everything makes it into the history books, sir. Davis's lips thinned. Indeed. Well, thank you for your alleged service. The air around them thickened. Several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young woman 2 rows back frowned, sensing the undercurrent of disrespect. William simply folded his hands in his lap, his dignity intact despite the obvious dismissal. But the Air Marshal wasn't finished. You know, Davis announced, loud enough for half the cabin to hear, it's actually a federal offense to impersonate military personnel. Heads turned. William's spine stiffened. I'm not impersonating anyone, he replied, voice steady but quieter now. Davis approached William's row, looming over him. The Ton Hoa Bridge operation was led by Colonel James Howard. Everyone knows that. I serve under Colonel Howard, William clarified, but Davis was already shaking his head. Sir, I need to see some identification. Davis demanded, hand extended. William reached for his wallet, but Davis continued speaking over him. Military imposters are unfortunately common. People claiming medals they never earned, operations they never saw. A businessman across the aisle chuckled. Someone whispered, stolen valor. Another passenger muttered, or dementia. Poor old guy probably doesn't even remember what he had for breakfast. William's fingers trembled slightly as he retrieved his ID. The whispers around him growing louder, more amused, more dismissive. His face remained composed, but something in his eyes dimmed. William handed over his standard driver's license. Davis examined it with theatrical skepticism. Nothing military here, he announced, handing it back. Perhaps you're confused, sir. William's jaw tightened. My military ID is in my checked luggage. Convenient, Davis replied, not bothering to hide his smirk. A flush crept up William's neck, not from embarrassment, but from a deep, controlled anger. After 3 decades of service, countless missions where his life hung by threads thinner than spider silk, after burying friends and carrying scars visible and invisible, to be publicly humiliated like this cut deeper than any wound he'd sustained in combat. The worst part wasn't Davis's disbelief. It was a ripple effect. The sideways glances from other passengers, their whispers, their judgment. In this moment, suspended in the sky, William Montgomery had never felt more grounded by the weight of prejudice. Just as Davis turned away, triumph etched across his face. The cabin phone rang. The lead flight attendant answered, listened, then looked directly at Davis with widened eyes. Sir, the captain needs you immediately. Davis strode forward. disappearing into the cockpit. The cabin settled into uneasy quiet. Minutes ticked by. When the cockpit door reopened, Davis emerged looking significantly paler. Behind him stepped the captain, followed by 3 passengers no one had noticed boarding. 2 men and a woman in impeccable business attire, each wearing subtle but unmistakable Pentagon credentials. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced, "I apologize for the interruption. We have distinguished passengers aboard who weren't properly acknowledged." The woman stepped forward. "I'm Colonel Miranda Reeves, Pentagon Special Operations Liaison. We're escorting Lieutenant General William Montgomery to Washington for a classified security briefing." The cabin fell completely silent. Even the engine noise seemed to fade away. Colonel Reeves continued, her voice ice-cold precision. "General Montgomery commanded some of the most successful covert operations in American military history. His work remained classified until last month." She turned toward William, offering a crisp salute. "General, we apologize for the delay." Davis stood frozen, the blood draining from his face as realization crashed over him. The Pentagon officials moved with practiced efficiency to William's row. "General Montgomery," Colonel Reeves said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "the Secretary of Defense sends his personal regards. Your security briefing is considered critical to national interests." William nodded calmly, his eyes briefly meeting Davis's. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Colonel Reeves wasn't finished. She turned to Davis, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes burning with controlled fury. "Air Marshal Davis, I understand you've been questioning the general's credentials?" Davis swallowed hard. "There was a misunderstanding." "Was there?" Reeves asked, her voice dropping to something sharper. "General Montgomery has held top-secret clearance longer than you've been alive. His operation saved countless American lives." One of the male Pentagon officials stepped forward. "Air Marshal, the General's Delta Force unit was instrumental in rescuing 37 POWs during operations that remained classified until recently." Davis's mouth opened, closed, open again. "I didn't." "You didn't what?" Reeves interrupted. "Didn't bother to consider that your assumptions might be incorrect? Didn't think that perhaps your history books had gaps? Or didn't consider that your treatment of a distinguished veteran might reflect something about your character rather than his?" The cabin was so silent, you could hear the ice shifting in abandoned drink cups. Colonel Reeves reached into her briefcase and pulled out a leather portfolio. From it, she removed a photograph and held it up for Davis to see. "Operation Thunderhead, 1972. General Montgomery is here, beside President Nixon." She pulled out another. "Desert Storm Planning Room. And here he is receiving the Distinguished Service Cross, one of 3 he's earned." Each photograph was like a hammer striking nails into Davis's professional coffin. The passengers around them craned their necks, whispering now in or rather than derision. William finally spoke, his voice quiet but carrying authority earned through decades of command. "I don't need these displays, Colonel." "With respect, General," she replied, "sometimes a record needs to be set straight." She turned back to Davis. "General Montgomery's missions remain classified because they were ahead of their time, integrated units operating behind enemy lines when the military still struggled with segregation. His team saved American, Vietnamese, and Russian lives alike." Davis looked physically ill now. "Sir, I had no way of knowing." "That," William interrupted, "is precisely the point, son. You had no way of knowing, yet you acted as if you knew everything." The captain stepped forward, ending the standoff. "Air Marshal Davis, you're relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Please take seat 27B. Davis's face flushed with humiliation as he retreated down the aisle, passengers' eyes tracking his every step. Colonel Reeves turned to William. "General, we have clearance to move you to first class." William shook his head. "I'm comfortable here, thank you." The woman sitting beside William, who had watched the entire scene unfold, suddenly stood up. "General, please take my seat. It has more legroom." William smiled gently. "That's very kind, but unnecessary." The businessman who had chuckled earlier approached, visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, I served in Iraq. I'm sorry for what just happened." It would be an honor to hear about your service sometime. One by one, passengers began to acknowledge William. Nods of respect, quiet thank yous, handshakes offered. The Pentagon officials eventually returned to their seats, but something fundamental had changed in the cabin. A collective recognition of how easily prejudice can blind us to the extraordinary people right before our eyes. News of the incident spread quickly after landing. Footage captured on passengers' phones went viral within hours. Hashtag Respect Jim Montgomery trended nationwide. Veterans groups rallied around William's story, using it to highlight how black service members' contributions have been systematically erased from military narratives. The airline issued a formal apology. The Transportation Security Administration launched an investigation into Davis's conduct. Military historians began researching Williams' previously classified operations, filling crucial gaps in America's understanding of Vietnam-era special forces. William hadn't sought attention. He'd spent decades operating in shadows, but his quiet dignity in the face of public humiliation resonated deeper than any combat story could have. 3 months later, William found himself at the White House, receiving long-overdue recognition from the president. As cameras flashed, he thought not of his own vindication, but of his fallen comrades, men and women whose sacrifices had often gone unacknowledged simply because of who they were, not what they'd done. William stood at Arlington National Cemetery 6 months after the flight incident, laying flowers at a previously unmarked grave. His former second-in-command, a black soldier whose heroism had been redacted from history until now. Thanks to William's newly public story, dozens of forgotten soldiers were receiving posthumous recognition. Schools were updating textbooks. Military academies were revising curricula. One incident on one flight had cascaded into a national reckoning with selective memory. Proof that truth, however long suppressed, eventually finds its way to the surface. And that dignity, even when challenged, can change the course of history. What hidden heroes have you overlooked? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, remember to like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear that appearances never tell the whole story.